James Reed was a talented software developer and a devoted husband and father living a peaceful life in a quiet suburb. He adored his wife, Jenna, and their bright, spirited daughter, Ellie, who was the light of his life. James's sharp mind and dedication earned him accolades at work and respect within his community. However, his idyllic life crumbled when he uncovered Jenna's affair with Sheriff Gregory Harris, a corrupt officer. The betrayal shattered James, but the worst was yet to come. Harris framed James for domestic abuse, fabricating evidence and manipulating testimonies to ensure a swift conviction. James received a sentence of 5 years and 2 months in prison, losing everything he had worked for. After serving his time, James was released. At the prison gates, he saw Jenna, Ellie, her grandparents, and his brother waiting. Not wanting to face them, he informed a guard about a restraining order and requested an alternate exit. Understanding James's unease, the guard led him through a series of corridors to a back door. Meanwhile, Jenna, asking about James's release, learned he had left through the back exit. Overcome with emotion, she wept, realizing James's desire for no contact. James walked briskly to the bus station, reflecting on the devastating 6 years that had passed. Before his world fell apart, James had been a 40-year-old engineer specializing in cutting-edge AI and security systems, often working on government contracts. His home, nestled near a nature reserve, was spacious, with a garden and an office he designed himself. James had built it at 20, using funds from a successful internet search engine he created. A quiet and thoughtful man, James stood 6 feet 2 inches with dark blonde hair and light brown eyes. He enjoyed cycling and hiking, though he avoided rigorous exercise. Shy yet charming, James loved reading and had an impressive memory for books. 6 years earlier, Sheriff Harris had enlisted James to optimize the traffic light system in the town to reduce congestion and pollution. During this project, Harris grew infatuated with Jenna. On the day James finished the assignment, he returned home to celebrate but noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Assuming they had guests, he entered the house, only to discover Jenna and Harris together. "What the hell is going on here?" James demanded. Smirking, Harris replied, "I'll let you two talk this over," before leaving with a mocking grin. Jenna, embarrassed, tried to defuse the situation. "Can we discuss this calmly?" she asked. Furious, James retorted, "Pack your things and get out. I want you gone when I return." Jenna, attempting to regain control, threatened him. "If you try to divorce me, I'll make sure you lose everything. You'll never see Ellie again." James, appalled, responded, "This is insane. I won't be blackmailed. I'm leaving. Be gone by the time I get back." Jenna said nothing and went to the bedroom. Minutes later, James was in his car, calling his lawyer. The next morning, James met his friend and attorney, Michael Freeman, at his house. "Coffee?" James offered. "Sure, but diluted this time," Michael quipped. James explained the situation, detailing Jenna's threats and Harris's involvement. Michael was visibly alarmed. "Sheriff Harris? This could get messy. He's dangerous." James quickly decided. "Draft the divorce papers. I'll give you the power of attorney to handle everything." Michael agreed, but as he prepared to leave, 5 officers barged in, guns drawn. "Which one of you is James Reed?" one shouted. "I am," James answered. "You're under arrest," the officer declared. "For what?" James asked, stunned. "Your wife and daughter claim you assaulted them," the officer replied. Michael interjected, "Don't say anything, James." "Where are you taking him?" "Main Street Station," an officer responded. "Be careful, James." "Don't speak without me," Michael urged as they led James away. Before leaving, Michael secured a flash drive and informed his fiancée, Lisa, of the situation. When Michael arrived at the station, he was told to wait. An hour later, he learned James had been transferred. Realizing Harris was orchestrating a cover-up, Michael called a judge. "This is Judge Franklin. Why is Mr. Reed's lawyer being denied access?" he demanded. The officer stammered, "It's a clerical error, sir." The judge ordered immediate access and demanded accountability. Eventually, Michael reached James in his cell and began recording. "Did they try to interrogate you?" Michael asked. James replied, "They threatened me, tried to force a confession, and withheld water and bathroom access. Eventually, they brought me a disgusting cup of tea. I'm terrified of what's next." Michael sighed. This is a setup. I'll assign a colleague to handle your criminal defense. I'll focus on your divorce. Agreed? James nodded. Yes, do whatever it takes. Don't forget the power of attorney. 6 months later, James Reed faced a hopeless trial. Photographs, testimonies from Jenna, Ellie, and 2 other women painted a damning picture of him as a violent abuser. James had no alibi since his hard drives malfunctioned during testing, and he decided against disclosing his backup system. The prosecutor depicted James as a neglectful father and an unfaithful husband. While Jenna and Ellie avoided eye contact with him, James sat composed, even as the jury delivered a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced him to 5.5 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after 3.5 years. James, however, suspected he would serve the full term due to Sheriff Harris's influence. When the sentence was read, Jenna turned pale, screaming, while Ellie wept. Sheriff Harris, by contrast, smirked with satisfaction. Later in his cell, James received a thick envelope from a woman who simply said, "You've been served." James handed the envelope to his lawyer, Michael Freeman. 2 weeks into his sentence, Michael visited to discuss the divorce. The envelope contained not only divorce papers but also documents for Harris to adopt Ellie. The pain of signing was palpable, but James did so, unwilling to drag Ellie into further turmoil. Jenna's demands included the house, half their savings, $5,000 a month for 5 years, and an educational fund for Ellie. Michael activated a small, high-frequency device to ensure their conversation remained private. James gritted his teeth. "The house was mine before we married. That's not happening. Offer her a lump sum of $1 million, no property or educational funds." Michael nodded and began drafting the counterproposal. Michael turned off the device, then asked, "What about the investment fund? Did you mention the amount to her?" James shook his head. "No." "Did the city pay for the traffic light upgrades?" Michael frowned. "Not yet." James instructed, "Remind them they owe me $175,000. I might need your help with that down the line." As Michael left, he felt a mix of sadness for his friend's unjust situation and relief at securing enough funds for his own goals. The next day, James moved to a new cell. After a brief speech from the warden, he was led to his assigned location, where he encountered Forge, the prison's most notorious bully. Forge sat scrawling on a piece of paper. James, curious but cautious, cleared his throat. "If you tell anyone I write poorly, you'll die painfully," Forge growled. James blinked in surprise. "Nobody taught you?" Forge looked startled. "You're the first to ask. I've been working since I was 8. James asked, "What are you writing?" Forge muttered, "A letter for my grandma's 87th birthday." James offered, "I can help. Dictate it, and I'll write it for you." Forge shook his head. "No. I want to write it myself. But you can rewrite it when I'm done." James nodded. "That's a good idea." Forge grinned and thumped James's shoulder. "Careful." James joked. Then he asked, "Do you want to learn to read and write? I could teach you." Forge's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, but don't tell anyone," he whispered. James reassured him. "Why would I? You're trying, and that deserves respect. I'm James, by the way." "What's your name?" "Darren Fleming. But everyone calls me Forge." "Forge?" James asked, intrigued. Darren nodded. "I've been through the fire, and I've come out stronger. It's what the guys started calling me when I first showed I was more than just a brute. Now, it's stuck." James smiled. "Sounds fitting." 2 weeks later, James was surprised to receive visitors. His brother had disowned him, and Michael wasn't scheduled to visit. In the visiting room, he saw Jenna and Ellie, with a guard stationed behind them. James, scoffing, said, "If you're here for fun, this is your chance." Turning to the guard, he added, "I'm done. Take me back." As he walked away, Jenna cried, "James, please wait," but he didn't look back. Later, James asked the guard, "Can I block future visits from them? They've got a restraining order but show up just to provoke me." The guard promised to consult the warden. When Michael visited the following week, he presented a revised divorce proposal. "She's willing to drop half the money if she can talk to you," Michael explained. James frowned. Tell her I'd rather lose $500,000 than talk to her. Michael hesitated. That's a steep price. James insisted, it's worth it. Please deliver the message. Changing the subject, he added, also, could you bring children's books, beginner to advanced levels, 2 per level? Michael, surprised, asked, why? James explained, I'm teaching my cellmate to read. Michael laughed. That's so like you, James. I'll get them. The next week, James received the books, sparking curiosity among the guards and prisoners. As one guard unpacked them, he remarked on James's intelligence. James shrugged and stayed silent. Back in the cell, Forge scowled at the attention. Ignore them, James said, handing him a book. Start with these. I'll have questions after you finish. Forge grumbled, why books? I just want to read so people can't trick me. James replied, books teach you more words and ideas. You'll enjoy it once you start. Darren nodded reluctantly. Okay, but only because you called me your friend. James smiled, extending his hand. Are we friends? Forge's massive hand engulfed him. Yeah, Forge said softly. You're my first and only friend. One day, James returned to his cell bruised. Forge jumped up, alarmed. What happened? He demanded. James groaned, my wife wants my house. Harris sent some goons to persuade me. Forge growled. They'll keep trying until you give in. James shook his head. I won't. The house has too much sentimental value. Forge asked for a description of the attackers. James detailed one of the 4 men before heading to the infirmary. The next day, 4 inmates landed in the infirmary, sending a clear message, leave James Reed alone. Over the following month, Darren Forge Fleming proved to be a quick learner and an eager reader. His enthusiasm inspired other inmates to seek James's help, earning James the nickname Dr. Reed. Before long, James had a class of about 10 prisoners eager for education and guidance. During one session, the group discussed life after prison and the challenges of finding stable jobs. Many nodded, admitting they'd ended up back in prison because of limited opportunities. This sparked an idea in James. He asked each prisoner what kind of business they'd like to start. One inmate, a baker, dreamed of opening his own bakery. James called it a math assignment and encouraged him to write a plan. Darren, meanwhile, expressed interest in working in security. Smiling, James said, who better to catch a thief than a reformed thief? You're my head of security. Darren, in his gruff voice, agreed, and the two shook hands. When Michael visited, James shared his idea for an investment fund to help former prisoners start businesses. Michael agreed to handle the legal aspects while James managed the finances, and they sealed the deal with a handshake. Michael then brought good news. Jenna signed the divorce papers. She's only taking half the savings, no alimony. She realized she couldn't make you talk. She's dropped the house and Ellie's funds. James signed the documents, reflecting on Jenna's change of heart. 6 months later, he was officially single, and the investment fund he and Michael created was thriving. It helped many former inmates build stable lives, earning James immense respect among prisoners and guards alike. His lessons had grown so popular that he was given a dedicated room, which reduced tension in the prison and made the guards' jobs easier. One day, a social worker asked James, "Why aren't you on the parole list?" James replied frankly, "The warden's friends with Sheriff Harris and submits negative reports. Plus, I don't want parole. If I get out early, Harris's men might frame me again. In a year, I'll be free for good." The social worker frowned. "You don't trust the legal system?" James shook his head. "I was framed by the sheriff and my ex-wife. I can't prove it, so no, I don't. Please, let's not talk about fairness." The social worker left, perplexed but respectful of James's position. James regularly attended self-defense classes, where Darren insisted he learn to fight efficiently and without hesitation. Over nearly 4 years, James had lost weight and gained muscle, a transformation driven by Darren's rigorous training. After perfecting striking techniques, Darren taught him dirty fighting methods to neutralize threats quickly. One evening, a guard intercepted James on his way back to his cell. "The warden wants to see you." "Now," the guard said. James's stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble? Should I shower first?" he asked nervously. "No time." "Move it," the guard replied. Minutes later, James entered the warden's office. The guard was dismissed, leaving James alone with the warden. "I hear you know computers. Is that true?" the warden asked. James replied cautiously, "In a past life, I was a programmer." "Are you any good?" the warden pressed. Sensing a trap, James answered, "If it's a software issue, I can probably handle it. Hardware's trickier." The warden gestured to the computer. "It's a software issue. Fix it." James examined the computer and found a poorly hidden keylogger alongside incriminating files. Realizing the setup, he devised a plan. When the warden returned with a guard, he reported, "I found illegal videos and a keylogger. There's also a worm damaging files. You could claim I downloaded them, but the ISP logs would clear me. I'll fix this, but I need written confirmation that I'm not responsible for unrestricted internet access." The warden, realizing his scheme had failed, reluctantly agreed. Over the next week, James worked at night, removing the keylogger and illegal files while installing his own covert monitoring tools. Curious about his old home, James accessed his private security system and was outraged to find Sheriff Harris overseeing illegal activities there. Seeing an opportunity for revenge, James created a program to monitor and record live footage from the system. He also replaced the keylogger with a subtler version and left a minor issue to ensure the warden would call on him again. A year later, as James wrapped up his sentence, the warden burst into the office. "Are you done yet?" he demanded. "Just finishing up. Call me if there's a problem," James replied smoothly. The warden grunted and dismissed him. Back in his cell, Darren noticed James's smirk. "What's up?" "You look like a cat that ate the canary," Darren teased. "Revenge, Darren. First, I need Michael to deliver a letter," James said, reaching for a pen and paper. A week later, an FBI agent read James's letter with mounting interest. It detailed Harris's crimes, including video evidence and access credentials. The agent asked Michael, "Can we verify this?" Michael replied, "I've got all day." After confirmation from IT specialists, they found proof of Harris's illegal operations, including live footage from James's security system. This evidence was enough to arrest Harris and begin dismantling his network. Just before James's release, a shackled and furious Sheriff Harris was escorted into the prison. Spotting James's grin, Harris shouted threats, but Darren's menacing glare silenced him. Later, James met with a visitor in a private room. She confirmed, "Your information caught him in the act. Harris will spend decades behind bars. You may even get a reward for reporting his tax fraud." James replied, "Seeing him locked up is reward enough." That night, Harris was warned to stay away from James and his family. Shortly after, James left the prison through a back door. Boarding a bus, he felt relief but knew he had work ahead. He had his network, starting with Michael, to help him rebuild his life. After a short ride and a walk, James arrived at a garage, where he was warmly welcomed. "Doc, you're free. Want a drink?" the man asked as James Reed stepped into the garage. James smiled. "No, thanks. I need transportation." "What do you have?" The man grinned. "Mike said you'd be stopping by. I've got a truck, clean, low mileage, and four-wheel drive. It's perfect for you." James nodded. "How much?" The man blinked, startled. "I can't charge you after everything you've done for me." James shook his head. "I appreciate that, but I insist. I'll take a discount, but nothing for free." The man sighed. "Mike said you'd say that. Let's work it out over tea." While waiting for the paperwork, James inspected the truck. Once finished, he started it up and headed out to visit an old friend. Late in the afternoon, he settled into a comfortable chair at Michael's house, where Michael's wife, Lisa, greeted him warmly. "It's been a long time since I sat in a chair like this," James admitted. Lisa smiled. She had always believed in James's innocence and noticed the toll the years had taken, his face lined with worry and his eyes now steeled with determination. Despite it all, James's polite nature endured. He had even brought flowers, remembering Lisa and Michael's wedding, which he had missed. Lisa mentioned Michael would be home soon with Indonesian takeout, James's favorite. When Michael arrived, he burst through the door, laughing. "What's that ugly blue truck in my driveway?" he teased before embracing James. "Welcome back. It's so good to see you." James nodded, momentarily speechless. Lisa patted him on the back. It's okay, take your time, she said softly. James shook off his thoughts and glanced around. It's a beautiful home, he commented. The tension broke as Lisa asked, "What can I get you to drink?" James replied, "Just sparkling water. I haven't had alcohol in over 5 years, and I'd like to keep it that way." They enjoyed dinner, and Lisa announced, "Tonight's for celebrating. Tomorrow, you can fight your battles." Understood? Both men agreed, and for the first time in nearly 7 years, James felt a sense of peace. As the evening ended, Michael informed James they had a guest room prepared for him. Embarrassed, James protested. "I can stay at a hotel." Lisa waved him off. "No arguments. You'll stay here, and tomorrow, we'll visit your house together." James relented, grateful. "Thank you. I'm exhausted. Show me where to sleep." Lisa softened her tone as she said, "Good night, you big fool. Remember, we love you." That night, James struggled to sleep, the quiet disconcerting after years of prison noise. He eventually drifted into a restless slumber. The next day, Lauren Winstead, a neighbor, watched through binoculars as James arrived at his house. She saw him step out of a blue truck, accompanied by Michael and Lisa. They seemed sympathetic, offering support as James retrieved a crowbar from his truck before entering the home. Inside, James surveyed the destruction. The kitchen was filthy, the bedroom reeked, and electrical wiring had been cut. All valuables were gone. It didn't feel like home anymore. Fetching his camping supplies from the truck, James started making the house livable. Lauren returned from picking up her son, Tim, just as James broke down. Lisa consoled him, while Michael quietly reassured, "It's okay. We're here for you." After a long moment, James calmed down, hugged his friends, and thanked them. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he admitted. Lisa hesitated before asking, "Are you sure you want to stay here?" "It's awful. Come back with us." James chuckled. "This is my home. I'll make it mine again. But I do need a new phone, and your numbers." Michael and Lisa handed over their business cards before leaving. As they walked to their car, Lauren approached. "Good morning, I'm your neighbor. Can I ask something?" Lisa replied curtly, "You can ask, but we might not answer." Lauren explained, "Things have been rough around here, and I'm worried about safety. Is your friend okay?" Michael laughed, but Lisa replied, "Lauren, your neighborhood just improved. James isn't okay yet, but he's one of the kindest people I know. He'll be the best neighbor you've ever had." With that, they drove off, leaving Lauren intrigued. James assessed the damage to his house. The electrical panel had been stripped, though the solar power box for his security system was intact. As he started cleaning, Lauren watched from her window, wary but curious. The next morning, she saw James working on a laptop. A quick search revealed his prison sentence for assaulting his wife and daughter, which confused her, given Lisa's reassurance. During breakfast, Lauren noticed a car with RNF services arrive. 2 men greeted James, their slogan reading, "We learned honesty the hard way. Now offering honest work at a fair price." James directed them to clean the kitchen, bedroom, and office, discarding everything ruined. Later, another truck arrived to haul away the debris. That evening, a van led by a woman pulled up. She handed Lauren flowers from Dr. Reed and apologized for the noise. Surprised, Lauren waved at James. 2 weeks later, James and a contractor planned the home's restoration. Though most of the house remained unlivable, he made his bedroom and part of the kitchen functional. One rainy evening, James noticed Lauren's car struggling in the driveway. Grabbing an umbrella, he approached. "Good afternoon. I'm James Reed, your neighbor," he introduced himself with a faint smile. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry to pick up my son, Tim, but my car won't start," Lauren admitted. James inspected it briefly. "Your car's not going anywhere. You can take my truck or let me drive you. If you don't mind being seen with an ex-con," he offered. Lauren hesitated before saying, "I'm more afraid of driving your truck. Could you take me?" James nodded. "Grab your coat. I'll lock up the house." Embarrassed, Lauren whispered, "I can't afford repairs right now." James stopped her. "Neighbor, I'm offering help, no strings attached. Just a friendly face and maybe some coffee sometime." Flustered, Lauren replied, "I'm sorry for being rude. I'm Lauren Winstead." "Yes, please, if you can fix it." James called a contact on speakerphone. "Doc, what can I do for you?" came the reply. "Hey, Jill, can you have David check my neighbor's car? The keys are in it." "We're off to pick up her son," James instructed. "Of course. Anything else?" Jill asked. "Just have David call me with the details." "Thanks," James Reed replied with a chuckle. "Good to know. A new phase is starting soon, looks like I'll need an assistant." Rose Winstead, feeling embarrassed, asked, "How can I get my car fixed quickly?" James reassured her, "Don't worry, David's already on his way with a tow truck." "Are you their boss?" Rose inquired. "No," James explained. "I just helped them start their business. Mike Freeman and I founded IPC and RNF services to support former inmates. That's why I get a little extra help." Rose looked at James with newfound respect. When they arrived at the school, Tim spotted the blue truck and exclaimed, "Cool. Our neighbor's truck. Why is it here?" "Our car broke down," Rose explained. James introduced himself. "I'm James. If your mom agrees, you can call me that too. Let's head home." Back at her house, David pulled James aside and whispered, "This car is a disaster. The engine's toast, and everything else is worse. What should we do?" James replied, "She needs a car. Do you have something suitable?" David nodded. "I've got a SUV, but the color's awful." "Bring it over, and send me the bill," James instructed. David approached Rose and said, "I need your car keys and paperwork." Near tears, Rose stammered, "I need this car. I can't afford repairs." David reassured her, "Don't worry. Doc sorted it all out. I'll bring you a replacement tonight." Rose hesitated, then asked, "James took care of this? Does he always do things like that?" David smiled. "Yes. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met, honest, generous, and never asking for anything in return. A lot of people owe him. But let me give you some advice, don't start thinking of it as a free ride. He doesn't deserve that." David paused and added, "And just so you know, I don't believe for a second he ever hurt his ex-wife or daughter. He doesn't have it in him." Meanwhile, James accessed his backup hard drives, which contained recordings from before his imprisonment. The footage revealed Jenna breaking her marriage vows, James's confrontation, and Sheriff Harris orchestrating the plan to frame him. James sat in silence, tears streaming down his face as he replayed the betrayal. One chilling moment showed Harris saying, "This man is a threat. He must be silenced permanently." James stopped the footage and called the FBI. When the agents arrived, James handed over 2 discs and said, "I need certified copies of these recordings. They prove I was framed and imprisoned despite my innocence. Now it's time to settle accounts." Jenna, working as a legal secretary in a job Harris had arranged, felt trapped and guilty but maintained her lies. One day, the prosecutor summoned her, but when she arrived, an FBI agent, Agent Fuller, greeted her. "We're reopening James Reed's case," Fuller said, showing footage of her and Harris plotting against James. Jenna fainted. When she regained consciousness, the prosecutor was in handcuffs. Fuller declared, "You thought you could get away with this? We have months of recordings, including a murder plot." A week later, Jenna confessed, and Harris was charged with numerous crimes. He faced life in prison, while Jenna was convicted of false reporting and perjury. James, determined to shield Ellie, made it clear he didn't want her left without a mother. However, he sought damages against Jenna, suing her for $100,000 for each year he was imprisoned. He also sued Harris for $1 million per year, plus damages for his home and property. The city quickly settled its part in James's unjust imprisonment. Harris, arrogant as ever, dismissed the lawsuit, but the court ruled in James's favor. Harris lost his fortune, which was placed in a trust fund for James and Mike's investment company. Jenna, terrified by the lawsuit, lost her job and faced losing her home. In prison, she was ignored by fellow inmates and informed by a cynical guard about the investment program James had started because of her betrayal. Harris learned James was awarded $5 million in damages and $500,000 for renovations. Enraged, Harris screamed threats, but within a week, rough visitors silenced him. By then, James had been out of prison for a year. He and Darren Fleming had grown close, and James's home was restored, albeit minimally decorated. Quietly, James purchased every house for sale in the cul-de-sac. One stormy night, he noticed Rose and Tim huddled in their doorway, soaked and shivering. Grabbing 2 raincoats, he rushed outside. "What are you doing? You'll freeze!" James shouted. "Here, put these on and come inside." Initially, Rose hesitated, but after looking at James, she nodded. Once safe in the warmth of James's home, she looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "I panicked," she whispered. James softened. "I'm sorry for yelling. I was worried." "What happened?" "The electrical panel exploded," Rose explained. "Okay. Someone will check it tomorrow. Stay here tonight. I'll set up beds for you and Tim." "No arguments," James insisted. He found clean t-shirts and guided Rose to the bathroom for a hot shower. As he set up his flip phone in the office, he noticed Rose standing in the doorway. Slightly embarrassed, he asked, "Do you need something?" "Yes, you big idiot. I need to thank you. Can I kiss you goodnight?" Rose asked. She kissed his cheek, then hesitated. "Why did your ex-wife leave you and treat you so badly?" "I don't know. Either way, she's behind bars now," James replied. Blushing, Rose ran off to get dressed. When she returned, James explained, "I designed hidden backup security systems. The external system exposed Harris's crimes, and the internal system proved my innocence." Sending her to bed, he added, "We have a busy day tomorrow." The next morning, a contractor inspected Rose's house with forge. Introducing Darren, James made Tim laugh as he shook Darren's large hand. Inside, Darren whispered to Rose, "Don't drink James's coffee unless you add water." Rose laughed. "I know. I tried it this morning." The contractor reported Rose's house was nearly uninhabitable. Tearfully, Rose confided, "I don't know what to do. My landlord is my ex, and he refuses to sell me the house." James quickly acted. "Darren, install a lock on my bedroom door for Rose and give her the keys. Also, handle the landlord." Later, James asked Rose, "Would you like to work for me? Full-time, either here or remotely once your house is fixed." "I don't have references, and I need to care for Tim," Rose said. "You can work here. I'll set up a room for Tim and help with his homework." "Say yes, it'll benefit both of us," James replied gently. Surprised, Rose asked, "Do you like me?" "Why not? If you were just a roommate, I'd have put you in a rental by now," James teased. "Now, say yes. Mike and Lisa will help set it up." Rose hugged James, kissed his cheek, and said, "When do I start?" "Now," James replied with a smile. Suddenly, "I feel like decorating." "You can stay here during renovations," James Reed offered. "Yes," Rose replied, smiling. "And Tim will be thrilled. But first, I need to quit my old job." "Can I use your phone?" she asked. Meanwhile, Tim discovered an old robot James had built. Excited, he called out, "What's this? Who made it?" James smiled. "I did. Let's find some batteries and a remote so you can play with it outside." 10 minutes later, Tim was happily driving the robot up and down the driveway. While Tim played, James arranged for a babysitter, and an hour later, he and Rose headed to the shopping mall. "I quit," Rose announced, sliding into the passenger seat. "They weren't happy and even offered me a promotion, more work, of course." James, pulling into the parking lot, commented, "Too little, too late." "What did they offer?" Rose noticed his concerned tone and felt a spark of warmth. Teasing, she asked, "What do you offer?" James replied with a smirk, "You'll start with $4,000 a month, free housing, and my eternal gratitude." "Deal!" Rose exclaimed, laughing. "But free housing? You haven't even bought a house yet." "Don't underestimate Darren's negotiation skills," James replied confidently. 2 weeks later, Rose was astonished at how quickly the RNF crews worked. Her house was becoming livable again, but she felt a tinge of sadness at the thought of leaving James's. They'd fallen into a steady routine, including morning cardio and workouts. Rose struggled initially, but soon began to see real progress. One evening, Tim excitedly announced, "I have a new math teacher." Rose, distracted by thoughts of James, noticed a car idling in her driveway. She watched it for a while but got pulled back into Tim's chatter about the robot he and James were assembling. After half an hour, the car was still there, so Rose approached and knocked on the driver's window. Inside the car sat a tearful young woman. It was Ellie Reed, James's estranged daughter. Ellie had become a math teacher after leaving her AI studies, forced to find work when her mother was imprisoned. She had heard about construction work in the area from a student and, feeling envious, suspected her father might be involved. Seeing how much older and more worn he looked, Ellie cried but hesitated to approach him. "You're not okay," Rose said gently through the window. "Come inside to calm down. You're in no condition to drive." Inside, Tim greeted her cheerfully. "Hello, Miss Ellie. Why are you here?" Rose kept her composure. "I'm Rose Wade." "Who are you?" "Eleanor Reed, but call me Ellie," she replied softly. "I'm Tim's math teacher." Rose's mind clicked. "Reed. James's last name." "Your father," she began. Ellie nodded sadly. "Yes. I haven't seen him in over 6 years." She sank onto the floor, overwhelmed. Rose helped her to the couch and sent Tim to his room. "We need to talk," she told Ellie. Once they were alone, Rose assured her, "You'll stay here tonight. Your father taught me to help when needed." Ellie sighed with relief, finally having someone to confide in. "I know almost everything," Rose continued. "Your father never mentioned your role, only that Gregory Harris adopted you." Ellie shook her head. "I refused the adoption. I stopped talking to my mother when I realized what they'd done to my father. When Harris tried to enter my room while I was dressing, I hit him and left that house as soon as I turned 18. It wasn't home anymore. My mother and Harris broke up soon after." Rose absorbed the information, realizing James believed his daughter had been adopted. "We need to find a way to reunite you with your father," she said. "He still keeps a photo of you on his desk." Ellie lightly touched Rose's hand. "You love him, don't you?" she asked. Blushing, Rose admitted, "Yes, but I don't know if I have a chance." Ellie smiled faintly. "I think you do. My mom said he's very shy and won't impose on women. The more he cares, the more distant he becomes. Please, take care of him. I want to see him happy." Ellie's words gave Rose a difficult night as she tried to process everything. Determined, she decided to start showing James how she felt. The next morning, Rose entered the gym wearing a crop top. James, already training, noticed her improved fitness and smiled. Halfway through the workout, Rose tested Ellie's advice. "Can I take the day off? I need to relax and buy some clothes. Tim's at school until 5. "That's a great idea," James replied. "Can I join you? I could use a break too." Rose pretended to consider. "I'd like that. You can help me choose." James hesitated. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm also your employer." "Yes, but you're also a dear friend," Rose said, kissing his cheek. "But one rule, no work talk." "Got it," James said with a grin. At the shopping center, Rose encouraged James to upgrade his wardrobe, shedding his convict image. She teased him at a lingerie store, aware of his reactions as she tried on dresses and admired her figure. One particular dress caught his attention, while another she loved but couldn't afford. In the sportswear section, James discreetly gestured to the saleswoman, ensuring she set aside Rose's favorite items. Later, they playfully argued over the bill at lunch, which James insisted on paying. When Rose unpacked her bags at home, she discovered an extra one with her favorite perfume tucked inside. She smiled, realizing James had noticed her preferences. "Maybe I really have a chance," she thought. The next day, Rose arrived at the gym wearing tight leggings. She caught James watching her in the mirror, though he tried to act casual. On the third day, nearing the end of their workout, Rose's eyes welled up with tears. Concerned, James immediately approached. "What's wrong, Rose? Why are you crying? Can I help?" For pennies or pounds, Rose thought. "I have a problem with a man," she admitted. "Is he hurting you?" James asked, his tone serious. "In a way. The problem is, I love him, but he doesn't respond to my advances. Any ideas?" Rose said, holding back a smirk. James hesitated. "Rose, I'm probably the last person to ask, but I'll try. If he's that stubborn, he needs a wake-up call. He'd be a fool to ignore you. You're smart, beautiful, and have a big heart. Be straightforward. He'll come around." Rose stood, turned to James, and sat on his lap. Blushing, she asked, "I'll be straightforward then, James, Will you make love to me here or in your bed? James was stunned. You mean me? Yes, you, Rose confirmed. Rose, do you love me? James asked softly. Her nod and smile gave him his answer. This makes me so happy. Rose, I love you too. I've loved you since you sat on your doorstep, covered in dust. Why didn't you tell me? Rose teased. I couldn't. I'm your employer and landlord. I promised no strings attached, James explained. Rose kissed him. Sometimes you're too decent for your own good. Now, take me to the bedroom. James took her hand and led her there, closing the door behind them. Later, Rose said, James, it's time to pick up Tim from school. One of us needs to shower. Why don't we shower together? James suggested with a grin. No way. If we do, we'll never make it in time. I'll go first and get Tim, Rose replied, laughing as she headed to the bathroom. James reluctantly agreed, content and happy. Rose showered, dressed, and drove to Tim's school. When she arrived, Tim was chatting with his math teacher, Ellie. Rose sent Tim to the car, and Ellie smirked. Found your man? You're walking funny. Rose laughed. Thanks for the tip about your dad. I almost had to drag him to bed. I promise I'll help you reconnect with him, but be patient, he's sensitive about this. 6 weeks later, during a workout, Rose struggled more than usual. James noticed her discomfort and grew concerned. Later that morning, Rose refused her usual coffee, opting for tea instead. When someone passed by with a cheddar sandwich, she bolted to the bathroom. James put the pieces together and gently told her to take the day off. He then went to the shopping center to visit a jeweler. The next morning, Rose felt better but skipped training, claiming a lingering virus. When she arrived at her office at 9:30, she found 2 small boxes on her desk. Opening the first, she discovered an antique pocket watch with a gold chain and a note. Time flies, and life is too short to waste. An employer wonders if his personal assistant would allow him to make her an offer. He thinks she is beautiful inside and out and believes that, over time, she will only become more so. Feeling a warm glow, Rose opened the second box and found 3 pregnancy tests. Realization dawned, James had noticed before she had. A mixture of joy, anxiety, and surprise filled her. As she looked up, James appeared in the doorway. Blushing, Rose said modestly, Yes, my employer can make an offer. James smiled and silently took her hand, leading her outside. Standing in the sunlight, he asked loudly, Rose Wade, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, you fool. You didn't need to ask formally, I'd have said yes anyway, Rose exclaimed. Cheers erupted as about 100 onlookers applauded the scene. James slipped an emerald-cut palladium diamond ring onto her finger, and Rose beamed. Oh my God, this is wonderful, she exclaimed. Tim appeared with champagne and glasses. I bet on yes, James said, winking at Rose. As you can see, I was prepared. The celebration carried on into the garden, and afterward, Rose and James sat quietly in the living room, looking out at the forest. Where do you want to live? James asked. We can stay here, or build something new. This house needs renovations, especially with a baby on the way. And what about your old house? I like this house, Rose replied. It's spacious and bright, with happy memories. Let's stay here. As for my old house, it's yours. James smiled. When Darren bought it, I re-registered it in your name. It's your decision now. Do you know someone who might want to live there, or should we sell it? Rose considered carefully. James was ready to agree to anything, so she wanted to choose wisely. I need to think. I might know someone. The next day, after picking up Tim, Rose and James discussed potential changes to the house. James suggested adding a pool, a balcony, and an extension for Tim. Rose, meanwhile, took a deep breath and said, I have someone in mind for my old house, but please listen carefully before responding. James nodded. Who is it? Tim's math teacher, Rose said cautiously. She needs a place to live, her house is being repossessed. Her name is Eleanor Reed. James froze. What? Rose took his hands and explained. It's your daughter, Ellie. She didn't know the full extent of what happened to you. Harris distorted her testimony and blocked her from seeing you. She even punched Harris when he tried to enter her room. Darren confirmed her story. James's face shifted through a range of emotions before he whispered, "Poor girl. What do we do now?" Rose kissed him. "Harris will pay, but don't do anything illegal. We have a baby on the way." "Yes, all 3 tests were positive. I can't risk you going back to prison." James exhaled deeply. "I won't do anything illegal." "But what about Ellie?" "Leave it to me," Rose replied. "Can you take an Uber home? The contractor and I will work on the house plans." "I trust you," James said with a smile. "Go get Tim and Ellie from school." At school, Tim ran to Rose, who whispered, "Can you call Miss Reed over?" Tim returned with Ellie, who looked worried. To ease the tension, Rose smiled brightly and said, "I have a home for you." "Really?" "I can pay for it," Ellie replied cautiously. "Yes," Rose assured her. "Get in the car and we'll go take a look." Ellie hesitated but decided to trust Rose. When they arrived at Rose's house, Ellie seemed confused. "This is your home," she said. "No," Rose replied. "I'm getting married, and you can afford it. You just need to meet the owner." Ellie grew wary. "I'm not sleeping with him," she said firmly. Laughing, Rose responded, "No, honey. He wouldn't even think of that." "When can I meet this mystery landlord, and when can I move in?" Ellie asked. "Now and tomorrow," Rose said, driving to James's house. As they approached, Tim ran ahead and knocked on the door. James opened it and asked, "Hey, big guy. Are you alone?" Tim grinned. "No, Mom's here with my math teacher. She's going to live in our house, right?" James looked at the 2 women, his voice softening. "Oh wow. 2 of the most beautiful and important women in my life, together." As they came closer, he whispered, "Ellie, you've become such a beautiful woman. Can I hug you?" Ellie flew into his arms, crying, "Daddy." They held each other tightly until Rose gently called them inside. Later, Ellie and James sat in his office, catching up. "Are you really offering me Rose's house?" Ellie asked hesitantly. "Yes, but there's one condition," James replied. "Your mother isn't welcome here, not in my garden or on my doorstep. She's still your mom, and I won't interfere, but she stays away from me." Before Ellie could respond, a loud knock interrupted them. James glanced toward the door and said, "That's Darren. Only he knocks like that." As he opened the door, Ellie heard Darren's deep voice, "Doc, may I introduce my son, Billy?" Hearing this, Ellie rushed to see what was happening, passing Rose on her way. Darren continued proudly, "Billy makes me proud. Even with a father in prison, he became a teacher. When he said he wanted to meet you, I thought I'd tag along." Billy, embarrassed, stammered, "Good to see you, sir. My father told me a lot about you. Actually, I came to ask something." "Okay, ask away," James said with a smile, though the silence grew awkward. Billy cleared his throat. "Alone, please." James nodded, leading him to the office, noting that Ellie had already left the room. He motioned for Billy to sit and asked, "How can I help you?" Billy blurted out, "Sir, I want to ask Eleanor to marry me. We've been in love for a long time, and I'd like your blessing." James smiled knowingly and called out, "Ellie, I know you're listening. Come in and introduce yourself properly." Ellie entered with a bright smile. "Yes, Dad. This young man wants to marry you and is asking for my blessing. Should I give it?" James asked teasingly. "Yes, please, Dad," Ellie replied, her eyes glowing. James extended his hand to Billy. "You have my blessing, son. Take care of my daughter. Now let's celebrate." As they returned to the living room, Ellie held James back and whispered, "Dad, Billy doesn't know yet. You're going to be a grandfather in about 7 months. The doctor confirmed it this morning." James's face lit up. "Ellie, you've made me so happy. How about a double wedding with Rose and me?" "That would be wonderful, but let's discuss it later," Ellie agreed, grinning. In the living room, Rose was chatting with Darren, unaware of the news. James sat down as Billy turned to Darren, saying, "Dad, meet my future wife, Eleanor. Mr. Reed just gave us his blessing. Can we have yours, too?" Darren's face lit up. "Of course. If it makes you happy, you have my blessing." James hugged Darren. "Now we're family in more ways than one." Billy looked puzzled until Ellie gently said, "You're going to be a dad, Billy." Billy did a celebratory dance of joy as Ellie explained, "When we decided to start a family, we wanted to have kids while we were still young. Your first try was a success. So, Mr. Fleming, you have a daughter and a grandchild." 2 weeks later, Jenna met Ellie for coffee. "You look radiant," Jenna said. "Yes, Mom, I have a place to live and I'm getting married," Ellie replied, her voice steady. "Where are you living? And when is the wedding?" Jenna asked. Ellie shared the address, enjoying her mother's surprised reaction. "It's next to where Dad lives." "We reunited," Ellie added. Jenna's face fell. "Can I stay with you when I'm released? I have nowhere to go. I'll need a job, too." Ellie took a deep breath. "You can stay until the baby is born. I'll need the room after that. You mentioned RNF services, they help convicts find work. You're expecting a baby? Why didn't you tell me?" Jenna asked, her voice rising. Ellie's tone hardened. "Dad told me to stay in touch with you, otherwise I wouldn't have. You cost me 6 years with him because you were too selfish and cowardly to do the right thing. I don't understand how you fell for Harris when you had Dad. How could you do this?" Jenna was stunned by Ellie's outburst, realizing how deeply she had hurt her daughter. She had tried to be a good mother but had never grasped how much Ellie valued her father. As Ellie left, Jenna was left reeling, feeling the weight of her actions and their consequences. When Jenna moved into Ellie's house, she was greeted with a cold but civil welcome. "Welcome back, Mom. You're our guest," Ellie said. "This is Billy Fleming, my fiancé and the father of our child. You can use anything in the house while you look for a job. There's a laptop in your room." Jenna looked down. "I tried RNF services, but I felt like I was being avoided." Billy interjected, "I'll ask my father. He has influence at RNF. He also made sure you were treated with respect in prison." "What does your father have to do with my ex-husband?" Jenna asked suspiciously. "Mom, don't even start," Ellie said firmly. "Dad wants nothing to do with you. Understand?" Billy explained Darren and James's connection, further unraveling Jenna's understanding of the situation. Jenna rested in her room but secretly hoped to rekindle something with James. Later, Darren visited Jenna, startling her with his imposing figure. "Good afternoon," he said. "Billy told me about your job struggles. Your association with Harris made things complicated. James felt responsible for the evidence that sent you to prison, so we had to isolate you. Now I hear you're looking for work?" "Yes," Jenna replied. "I'm a registered accountant and paralegal." "Perfect. My company, Beckman Investments, needs an accountant. You'll get a 1-month trial with free housing. If you're competent, you'll receive a permanent contract. But there's a condition, you must not contact James. I'll be your direct superior. Do you agree?" "I don't have a choice, do I?" Jenna asked bitterly. "Of course you do. You can refuse," Darren said calmly. Jenna agreed, shocked by the distance James maintained. As Darren left, she saw him warmly greeted by James through her binoculars. Jealousy surged when she spotted James embracing a pregnant woman with curly hair on his porch. She realized that woman was Rose and felt a deep pang of regret and loss. The day before Ellie's wedding, Jenna learned that James and Rose would also marry at the event. Though devastated, she attended. At the reception, she felt like an outsider but forced herself to mingle. The atmosphere was joyful, with little alcohol and traditional dancing. During a dance with Billy, she noticed Ellie and Rose speaking with James, who looked worried. As the dance ended, Jenna felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. Turning, she saw James. Up close, she noticed his sad but resolute eyes. Overwhelmed with guilt, she began to sob. "I'm so sorry for all the pain I caused," she said. "Jenna," James said evenly, "I'm glad you feel remorse. We're dancing because Rose convinced me to have compassion for you. I hated you, but she helped fill the void you left. We're dancing as strangers with a shared past. For Ellie's sake, I won't avoid you anymore. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, it will take time to even consider calling you a friend." Jenna clung to him, crying quietly. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "There are people willing to help you," James said softly. "I've provided the basics, but the rest is up to you." That night, Ellie offered Jenna a choice, stay the night or return home. Jenna chose to leave, and Mike and Lisa drove her back. During the drive, Lisa said gently, "You're alone and must reckon with your mistakes. James doesn't want to rob Ellie of a mother, but you need counseling to move forward. If you agree, tell Darren." At home, Jenna collapsed onto the sofa, overwhelmed by remorse. She realized James had truly moved on and found happiness. Now, she needed to try and do the same.